Well, good evening, everybody. Okay, good evening, everybody. All right, so they've got me on a tight schedule here, so pay attention. At the end of the Gospel according to John, John writes that in addition to the incidents related in the preceding Gospel, there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. With all due modesty and with no intention of sacrilege, I must confess that I sometimes feel like John when it comes to relating the history of the basic program, because there's so much to tell and generally so little time to tell it in. That again is the case here this evening. So rather than attempt even a highly abbreviated, complete history of the basic program, I'd like to share with you a few choice nuggets from that history and some reflections about them as my contribution to today's celebration. My theme, and therefore the title for my talk, is Only in Chicago, Only at the University of Chicago, the Basic Program at 70. For as far as I can tell, the basic program of liberal education for adults is literally unique. There are today simply no other rigorous, part-time, multi-year, structured, non-credit liberal education programs for adults organized around the collaborative close reading of classics, or what are often known as great books. And though I cannot entirely explain why this is so, I think I can suggest how this came to become so. Now, the ideas of liberal education in general and of adult liberal education in particular are hardly new. From the time of ancient Greece and Rome, it has been well established in the Western tradition that free individuals require an education that enables them to make the most of their freedom. The name for the education suitable for liberated individuals is liberal education. And since the time of ancient Greece and Rome, liberal education has included the study of classic texts. Before the modern era, however, relatively few people had the opportunity to pursue meaningful education of any kind, and liberal education was therefore generally an elite preserve. With the arrival of mass education and mass literacy in the 19th and 20th centuries, universal liberal education became possible and in the minds of some people, necessary. What had been previously restricted to the elite could and should be made available to everyone. As University of Chicago President Robert Maynard Hutchins once put it, the best education for the best is the best education for all. From this perspective, therefore, the notion of what might be called a mass aristocracy or universal aristocracy would, could, and should no longer be a contradiction in terms, but rather a tangible reality. As Hutchins wrote in his 1952 book, The Great Conversation, which is up here among the collection, the aim of liberal education is human excellence, both private and public, for man is a political animal. Its object is the excellence of man as man and man as citizen. It regards man as an end, not as a means, and it regards the ends of life and not the means to it. For this reason, it is the education of free men. Other types of education or training treat men as means to some other end, or are at best concerned with the means of life, with earning a living, and not with its ends. The substance of liberal education appears to consist in the recognition of basic problems, in knowledge of distinctions and interrelations in subject matter, and in the comprehension of ideas. About the means of liberal education, Hutchins wrote that the method of liberal education is the liberal arts, and the result of liberal education is discipline in those arts. The liberal artist learns to read, write, speak, listen, understand, and think. He learns to reckon, measure, and manipulate matter, quantity, and motion in order to predict, produce, and exchange. As we live in the tradition, whether we know it or not, so we are all liberal artists, whether we know it or not. We all practice the liberal arts, well or badly, all the time, every day. As we should understand the tradition as well as we can in order to understand ourselves, so we should be as good liberal artists as we can in order to become as fully human as we can. Given these realities, Hutchins concluded that the liberal arts are not merely indispensable, they are unavoidable. Nobody can decide for himself whether he is going to be a human being. The only question open to him is whether he will be an ignorant, undeveloped one, or one who has sought to reach the highest point he is capable of attaining. The question, in short, is whether he will be a poor liberal artist or a good one. As in traditional elite liberal education, modern mass liberal education was to include the study of classic texts, though now conceptualized as Greek and Latin texts in English translation, plus more recent texts written in European vernacular languages, again translated into English where necessary. Indeed, in the minds of some, the reading of what came to be called great books would even become the centerpiece of modern mass liberal education. Because modern mass education often included educating adults who had reached their majority without having had sufficient formal education, the discipline of adult education as a remedial enterprise also arose in the late 19th century. As we've heard, the University of Chicago was an early pioneer in the field, establishing the university extension, the precursor to the Graham School, as a fundamental unit of the university. Along with the development of the Great Books movement, however, an alternate vision of adult education arose, one that was not remedial, but focused on that necessary education that could only be pursued in adulthood. In his 1952 article, Adult Education, for example, Mortimer Adler distinguished between what he called schooling and training that happened during youth and education proper that could only be undertaken by adults. Adler argued that if it is true that education is primarily a matter for adults, then it is necessary for all adults, not just for those who suffered deprivation in youth through lack of this or that part of formal schooling. It is no longer just necessary for the other fellow. It becomes a matter which each of us must face for himself. Indeed, Adler invited his readers to think of an adult saying, "I have been going on with my learning for the last 5 years, from 30 to 35, and now I have completed my adult education." No more preposterous words could be uttered. For if anyone were to say, at the age of 35, "I have completed my adult education," all one could respond is, "Are you ready to die? What are you going to do with the rest of your life?" Adult education does not consist of a course of study or a subject matter to be mastered in a fixed number of years, something to take an examination on and pass, and then be finished with forever. That is not the point. Adult education, once begun, is interminable. Nothing but serious illness relieves any adult of his responsibility to continue learning year after year, every part of every year, until the end of his life. All of these forces, the emerging desire for mass liberal education, the rise of the Great Books movement, and competing notions of adult education, arrived at the University of Chicago following the installation of Robert Hutchins as the new president of the university in 1929. In his new capacity, Hutchins quickly became a pioneer of mass liberal education after claiming to have discovered his own ignorance about the essence of a proper education and turned to Mortimer Adler for help. In 1930, Hutchins and Adler set about co-teaching an undergraduate course modeled on an earlier course taught at Columbia University by John Erskine, which is one of the early Great Books course and in which Mortimer Adler had been a student. This teaching experience in 1930 became the impetus for a more general reform of the university's undergraduate curriculum as a whole. In 1934, the University of Chicago Law School offered its first Great Books course. In 1936, Hutchins appointed a committee on the liberal arts to devise a college based on the elements of the classical curriculum and consisting of studies in the great books. Due to external criticism and internal dissension, the committee soon abandoned its task, and in 1937, several members of that committee decamped to the struggling St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, where they and others instituted the new program, a 4-year undergraduate curriculum organized around the reading and discussing of great books, a curriculum that continues to this day. Beginning around 1939, Mortimer Adler and others also began experimenting with designing and offering great books courses for adults through university extension. Looking back now, these often seem like liberal educators fighting the battle of the home front as the world erupted into war. Readings often focused on the classics of democracy, though selections from Hitler's Mein Kampf and Marx's Communist Manifesto were also included. Ever the promoters, Hutchins and Adler continually looked for opportunities to promote the great books idea to the wider world. In 1940, Adler published his wildly successful How to Read a Book, The Art of Getting a Liberal Education. In 1943-44, Hutchins and Adler organized a PR-friendly group of leading Chicagoans to read and discuss great books under the guidance of a range of University of Chicago and St. John's College luminaries. Known as the Fat Man's Great Books class, a play on the name of the college course, which was informally known as the Great Men's Fat Book Course. The course was a response to an observation by a Chicago business executive that executives such as he were able to hire staff to do everything for them except to read and understand. In 1947, the Great Books Foundation was founded in Chicago to promote the reading and discussing of great books around the country and around the world. And September 1948 saw Chicago observe a Great Books Week, which included events such as Adler lecturing at a downtown department store and Adler and Hutchins leading a discussion of Plato's Apology before a capacity audience of 3,000 in Orchestra Hall, with another 1,500 people being turned away. Finally, in April 1952, the University of Chicago-owned Encyclopedia Britannica published the great books of the Western world, comprising 51 volumes of 443 works by 74 authors, plus the one introductory volume by Hutchins, The Great Conversation, and a 2-volume Great Ideas Index called the Syntopicon, edited by Adler. With the end of World War II in 1945, these and other threads came together in the founding of the basic program in 1946. On a somewhat grand level, the emergence of atomic weapons at the end of the war horrified many people who worried that mankind's wisdom had not progressed as rapidly as mankind's technological prowess. Hutchins, in particular, seemed to have felt that the University of Chicago had significant responsibility in this regard due to the university's role in the development of these weapons, including Enrico Fermi's first controlled atomic chain reaction in Hyde Park in 1942. Likewise, the horrors of World War II and the prospect of a possible repetition, possibly with atomic weapons, with the forces of communism, impelled Hutchins and others to advocate the establishment of one world government on the one hand, and the universal wisdomification of mankind through the reading and discussion of great books on the other. On a more mundane level, there was also the issue of returning GIs and the education they would require when they got home. On May 3, 1946, a draft document entitled "A Proposal for an Integrated Curriculum in the Liberal Arts at University College" was circulated for comment. The document began, "This memorandum attempts, first, to state the problem of collegiate liberal education for adults at University College, and then to propose a solution in the form of a program of studies. The word collegiate is stressed to differentiate what is here proposed from a program of truly adult liberal education. Collegiate liberal education for adults can be justified for some, not all adults, and only on the grounds that some adults were deprived of such education in their youth. In contrast, adult liberal education is a necessity for all adults, regardless of the amount or quality of prior institutional training. The proposed program was a 4-year curriculum modeled on the new program at St. John's College that consisted of 5 educational activities conducted through twice-weekly meetings of classes of 3 hours, and that culminated in the opportunity for graduates to apply for a BA degree from the university. The 5 activities were the seminar, the humanities tutorial, the science tutorial, the problem workshop, and the lecture. Initial reactions to this proposal were mixed. The response from the central administration of the university included the following. The proposal states that the program can be justified only on the grounds that some adults were deprived of such education in their youth. It further asserts that the Great Books seminars represent a true program of adult liberal education. It is my observation that anyone is admitted to the Great Books seminars who is interested, regardless of his possession or lack of collegiate liberal education, and I expect that the practice will continue. Mulling these things over in my mind, I regretfully come to the conclusion that the proposal offers no real justification at all for the program it purports to sponsor. They're talking about the basic program. Nonetheless, the proposal was approved for the program to commence in the autumn quarter of 1946, and staff were hired. However, there was still a problem of what to call the new thing. A contemporaneous memorandum states that as late as July 2nd, 1946, Mr. Cutler said that he was somewhat stumped in thinking of a good name for the program. He offered as his suggestion the basic program of liberal education for adults and requested the staff to make further suggestions. Mr. Houle suggested that the article A might be substituted for the article V in order to avoid pretentiousness. Mr. Barden said that the title did not sing, but that he could not think of a better one. Since the program would soon have to be named, Mr. Cutler requested that any suggestions from the staff should be brought to his attention in the near future. Apparently, no adequate suggestions were received, since the local and national publicity later that summer announced that the University of Chicago was launching a new basic program of liberal education for adults centering about the great books. The first quarter of the basic program began in autumn 1946 with 70 students. In the 70 years that it has been in existence, the basic program has continued to be a work in progress as program administrators and instructional staff pursue the never-ending task of learning how to better conduct a program of true adult liberal education in an ever-changing world. Indeed, in many ways, the program today resembles the proverbial camel, you know, the horse that was designed by a committee. Only in our case, the committee's been sitting for 70 years. Among the notable changes since the founding was the introduction in winter 1948 of what was then known as the weekly program, consisting only of the seminar and the humanities tutorial, as a program that was less intensive than the basic program on the one hand and more substantial than the Great Books seminars on the other hand. Over time, this new once-a-week format supplanted the original twice-a-week format, becoming what we know today as the basic program. Other changes include the introduction in 1950 of alumni courses, and more recently the introduction of 2-year alumni sequences that extended the basic program into a not-so-basic program, offering opportunities for real lifelong learning. Other activities have been added over time, such as summer courses, new lecture series, and weekend study retreats and symposia. A 2-year certificate was instituted and then later eliminated. Graduates of the basic program were granted full alumni status as alumni of the University of Chicago. And of course, the teaching staff has continued to think about and revise the 4-year reading list that has been at the heart of the program since the beginning. In all these 70 years, though, I would say that there are 2 constants that have already been alluded to. One is the constant that we have been really fortunate to have a dedicated teaching staff. This program is unique in having a permanent teaching staff that is responsible for the design, review, and revision of its educational programming, and our instructors are drawn from the ranks of University of Chicago graduate students and are therefore highly trained, broadly knowledgeable in the Chicago way of thinking. Over the years, as some of you may know, we've had some actual famous instructors on the roster. There was Alan Bloom, who many of you will know as the author of The Closing of the American Mind. We had Galway Kinnell, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and also the Poet Laureate of Vermont. And of course, everybody here, I believe, will remember George Anastopoulos, whose portrait is right over here, who served with the program from 1958 to 2014, and who was the subject of a famous McCarthy-era law case that went to the United States Supreme Court. The other constant that the basic program has been blessed with over the years is a steady core of dedicated students who have been highly engaged. When people find that the basic program is right for them, you just can't pry it out of their hands, it seems. Many people here will know, and there have been anecdotes, that people form deep friendships with each other, with students and the staff. The program has been responsible for a number of marriages over the course of the year, sometimes between students, sometimes otherwise. And we also have, as been mentioned, a number of students over the years who've been taking classes with the basic program for 20 or 30 years. And I really invite you to think about that. I mean, the idea of it becomes almost like subscribing to the basic program the way somebody subscribes to the theater or the opera or something like that. Students have also taken an important hand in shaping the activities of the basic program. At various points in the history, we've had a student association, we've had a student newsletter, students have organized film nights. The weekend study retreats that we all know and love now were actually originally organized by basic program students because they needed to get more than they were getting through the official program, and also instigated the very first alumni courses in 1950. Basic program students have been essential in helping us recruit new students into the program. In fact, word of mouth has been our best method of reaching new students for almost the entire lifetime of the program. Basic program students have been responsible for supporting the program financially through scholarships for students who are not able to make it because of limited means, and through other financial support. But perhaps most dramatically, at least to my mind, is when we see students going above and beyond the call of duty to make it to the basic program. We have students that commute enormous distances to come to class. By car, we've had people driving from all corners of Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan, and by plane coming in from New York City, Washington, D.C., Arizona, and Florida on a weekly basis. We've had students participate in the program by telephone, and as you may know, we're now offering online courses, and people who are no longer in the Chicago area are able to continue participating in the basic program. So I'd like to end by returning to the theme with which I began. Only in Chicago, only at the University of Chicago. For there does seem to be something special about this city, There is today no basic program in New York or Los Angeles, for example, nor in Cleveland or Syracuse, where attempts were actually made to replicate the basic program. I've often thought that there is something essential about Chicago being a big city, but also a big Midwestern city, something about authenticity. Likewise, there does seem to be something special about the University of Chicago and the University of Chicago way of approaching education, a rigorous, text-based examination of first principles that teaches students how to think, not what to think. In any case, I trust you will agree with me that the basic program is unique and uniquely valuable, and that it is most definitely worth celebrating, and that we owe everyone connected with the program, past and present, administrators, students, spouses, instructors, support staff, an enormous debt of gratitude. Thank you.